Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Open Night of Blockchain Technology Conference. I'm glad that you're here. I see lots of faces which are familiar from over the day. We also got lots of external guests, so welcome as well to this discussion and to this kind of meetup what we are organizing here. This is a joint event organized by Blockchain Technology Conference and by BTC-ECHO, the leading German news portal for blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies, right? And having said that, it's my job just to hand over to Philip, who is the chief analyst of BTC-ECHO. And they conducted a survey on the usage of blockchain technology, especially in Germany. Right. He is going to tell us a few things about what they experienced and what they've learned from their survey. And after that, we open up the discussion together with the panels, and of course, all of you are also invited to contribute to the conversation. So give a warm hand to Philip Giese.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for the nice introduction. I have to be honest, it will not be me who will talk a lot about the study or about the blockchain ecosystem in Germany. That will be the task of other people, or to say it a little bit more precisely, of the panelists. But I will start a little bit with an introduction, with the motivation for this study. BTC-ECHO is now since 2014 alive, and we saw some ups and downs within the market. One year which was quite interesting was the last year, 2017, when the mainstream got in contact with blockchain technology. It was really an exciting time because a lot of companies were at least claiming to do something with blockchain. The prices of cryptocurrencies were skyrocketing. Everybody was thinking that he will get rich in no time, and it all culminated in this huge bubble in the end of 2017. All good things have come to an end, and so that was also the precursor for the bear market which we are still in today. My personal hypothesis, however, is that a bear market is not the worst thing that can happen to an ecosystem. Startups, small and medium-sized enterprises, and large corporations now not only try simply to follow a hype and brand themselves with the term blockchain and label themselves Long Island blockchain, for instance, but question critically where blockchain gives them anything of value. The number of patent applications as well as the number of academic articles has skyrocketed within this bear market and is exceeding the numbers of preceding years. The reason for that is simple, because as enterprises as well as academia sees the impact that distributed ledger technology can have on our lives, so to say. What does that mean for Germany? Well, to answer that, we made a study together with BlockState, and with that I would like to introduce our first panel guest. Paul Claudius is the co-founder and managing director of the BlockState AG, a fintech providing blockchain-based solutions for companies within the finance sector. Moreover, he is the founding member of the DIA Association. I heard as a label an open source financial platform information provider. My personal suggestion, I hope that's not completely wrong, and I mean it in the best way possible, is that you can think of that as a mixture between a coin ranking site, GitHub, and Wikipedia. So I find it highly valuable. And yeah, Paul, would you like to tell a little bit about this study?
Can possibly, yeah, now it works.
Great.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Philip. Everything correct. DI actually is a crossbreed of Wikipedia and Bloomberg, so open sourced, crowd validated financial data provider. We built this because of a need of BlockState. At BlockState, we're building financial market infrastructure, and we had a lack of transparent pricing information in the crypto asset space. And we're based out of Zug and Berlin, and actually Switzerland has a very close-knit, tight blockchain ecosystem. Everybody knows each other, and it's quite transparent who are the actors in the system. And we thought, how does the German landscape actually look? And there were very few studies, not really an overview of who's active in the space, and just the really big projects in Berlin, usually base layer protocols, were somehow present in media, and we thought, let's actually look who's in this ecosystem and what are the people building here. And this is why we asked BTC-ECHO, obviously, because you know the ecosystem probably best. Let's do a survey and find out actually what the people are building in the German ecosystem and where they are. So we're actually gathering still the last responses. So it's just a bit of teasing some information we already analyzed. I think no big surprise is that the far majority of blockchain startups are based out of Berlin, followed by Munich and Hamburg. We ask roughly, I think, in the hundreds, got 200 responses, and we also saw in which industries these startups are actually active. It's also probably not a surprise, primarily financial services, followed by media/entertainment, and third one was identity, which I think is quite overrepresented when you compare it to the overall startup ecosystem, how many players are active in this niche vertical. The majority of startups, roughly 70%, is actually making revenue. Also possibly a surprise, because everybody thinks nobody needs to make money if you didn't get a successful ICO in 2017, but majority actually is making revenue. Out of these 200, roughly a third was incorporated only in 2017 and 2018. So I thought this is surprising. Everybody thought most of the startups were founded actually in 2017 throughout the hype, but a lot of them worked already prior in this industry.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, I would suggest that we start, or would you like to...
I think these are the highlights, and you get the whole picture.
Yeah. The point is we have limited
I promise
time.
actually to do 3 sentences. I think
right.
I kind of messed this up. So next week we'll publish together the study. Then you'll get even more details.
Yeah.
Stop now.
With that, thanks a lot. Another short advertisement: if you would like to stay in touch and get the study really fast, you can visit btc/echo.de/studie, right? Yeah. And yeah, in order to deepen now on our understanding regarding the German blockchain ecosystem, I'm happy to invite some other panelists to the stage to discuss it a little bit more thoroughly. I would begin with Vinita Rathi. She is the CEO and founder of Systango, a web and mobile development software company with customers such as Deloitte, Oracle, or Porsche. She's also the founder of Studio FinTech, a product studio that specializes on fintech and blockchain development. And you are, if I remember correctly, an ex-VP of Goldman Sachs, so you're an expert for this intersection between finance and technology. Vinita is not from Germany, and I think that's quite great, because if we all in the panel would be from Germany, we would sit in our own echo chamber and praise ourselves for being the huge huge mecca for blockchain technology here in Germany. So thanks that you are here.
Thank you very much.
The next guest on the panel is Katharina Adam. She is professor and lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences, also known as the HTW Berlin, in the department Business Administration and Engineering. Besides this quite demanding job as a professor, she's also the co-founder of SIMST, a blockchain-based reputation platform for tenants and landlords, and author of a white paper with the nice name Project Hurricane, which deals with ownership of real estate. I think she, as a professor, is well known about the impact blockchain has on academia and vice versa. So again, thanks a lot for being here. The third guest on the panel is Ha Duong. He is principal at Cambriel Capital, an investment firm focused on crypto assets. So yes, we have somebody speaking for cryptocurrencies here. That's quite nice. Prior, he was an investment manager at Project A Ventures, and you are also an advisor for Neufund, as far as I remember. So here we have an expert for the investment and funding situation all around blockchain technology. So again, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And last, but absolutely not least, we have Ingo Rammer. Perhaps the one or the other guy has heard his keynote talk in the morning. He is the managing director and co-founder of ThinkTancture AG, a technical support company which provides support and counseling for software developers and the like. And one focus of your work is the use of blockchain within B2B environments. So he's an expert on using Hyperledger, Fabric, or Tendermint for private blockchains. And with that sense, thanks again for being here. So I'm coming to that end of our panel. Yeah, let's first start with a little bit of a provocative question. Paul has already stated that the majority of companies in Germany regarding the blockchain ecosystem comes from Berlin. I'm from Berlin, so perhaps I'm a little bit of a Lokalpatriot, as we say in German. Could we say that that Berlin is the blockchain capital of Europe? So I would like to have, one, let's say, one answer from each one of you. Perhaps you could start. Yeah, short answer.
So we all believe in decentralization, and I hope that the question of what's the capital will not be important in the future anymore.
Yeah, that's a quite good
That's the cheeky one. The non-cheeky one is, I think the Berlin could be considered the capital if it comes to technical development. If it comes to funding, then maybe London is a better place to look at. And also comparing the two cities, I think London has the advantage of having not only the digital innovation center in one place, but also the financial center, industrial center, a lot of other industries in one capital. In Germany, you have a much more distributed kind of like economic system, where you must look at Hamburg, Munich, Frankfurt for other hubs where there's a lot of innovation going on. So with this, maybe Berlin is a little bit disadvantaged in the short term, but in the long term, let's see.
Okay, thanks.
So I was going to say, if you take London out of Europe, then probably Berlin is.
Okay.
But given today's situation, I would, and probably I'm biased towards London, but I will agree, saying that London not only is a financial capital, but also has a lot of innovation centers that really promotes and help and accelerate a lot of technology innovation that's happening over there. Okay. So for me, I think probably it's London first, then Berlin second.
I think different ecosystems provide different benefits to companies. So I see, and that's also what we do. We do a bit of opportunistic arbitrage between these ecosystems. So customers, clients are primarily based in Switzerland. That's interesting for regulatory purposes. In regards to developers, Berlin, I think, is a much better place to find people who are interested in what we're building. So ideally, as Hans said, this doesn't need to be, also a company doesn't need to be based in one ecosystem, but distributed and leveraging the advantages of multiple ecosystems.
From my perspective, starting with a startup or diving into the industry, it would be very nice to stay and be located here in Berlin. But if you move on and if you try to develop your company, you will go out of Berlin because then the support is not good enough. And therefore, at the beginning, yes, you find good guys who are willing to join your company, your startup, but when you start to grow, you potentially need to go somewhere else.
I would absolutely agree with this. I think it's centered in Berlin these days because the startup scene in Germany is centered in Berlin these days. That's one of the major hubs for tech startups in Europe, of course. Now, given that I am the odd one out insofar as I am the token technical person on this panel, and I'm focusing mainly on private chains, what we see is slightly different from the Berlin startup world, because the companies we work with are largely not in the startup phase. Some of them have been around for 100 years, and they are looking into blockchain technologies to integrate them with their existing business. So they are not starting up a new line of business. They are not using blockchain as the strategic main force for them, but they'll just try to find out what this technology will bring for their business. So our projects are distributed all over Europe essentially, and wherever you find established companies.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the answers already. You gave me already some good point to hang on, because I would like to ask, who are the driving forces behind the blockchain innovation in Germany? You have already said that that large corporations also play a role, and we are not talking only about small startups. And so it would be nice to listen from every one of you what kind of role both extremes play within this ecosystem. So perhaps we start at the other end, so to say.
So I think the distribution of roles is also very clear. Big corporations, classic corporations, are not the ones who are driving innovation. I think we see this in all kinds of technological areas. If you look at the German banks, then they are not the ones who drive the development of new blockchain technology. They are the ones who want to find out how to use it. That's mainly what they want to do and want to find out. As all of the large companies do, eventually they will buy existing startups, which of course is the strategy of the startups as well. So I think that's the separation in the business models.
Yeah, and maybe from my perspective as being a professor, it is very interesting for me to educate the students. And what I'm doing is I do not show them how to code and how to do that stuff. What I think it's much more important to understand what is the need of the business. What kind of processes are there? What do you need to figure out? Does it really make sense to use, for instance, a blockchain solution or not? And in comparison to a lot of companies and also existing companies we have seen, they like to use this as a fig leaf. Oh, come on, we do something with blockchain. It's so fancy. We are so good. So, hi, we are the new generation, and we know to convert the old stuff into the new one. And if you then dive quite a bit deeper and analyze what they are doing, very often you see they can do it better. And this is, I think, this is my task as a professor, and I do a lot of lecture at the university while trying to educate my students to be able to figure out what is the main purpose of using blockchain, plus how could the process flow look like, and when we really are able to create an added value while using blockchain technology.
I think actually the allocation of budgets in large financial institutions in regards to infrastructure, where 85 to 90% is spent on maintenance and not in innovation, is actually the underlying business thesis for what we're doing. So we tend to group these organizations in three different groups. Number one, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Fidelity and Asset Management. It's roughly like 2% of the market who have been investing in DLT in the past years. Then there are roughly 5% who have a blockchain team. They're scouting different startups and business cases, implementing them in their business lines. But the vast majority didn't spend any money on this and is focusing on their core business. So they will be very much rely on external solutions they need to integrate when group number 1 is rolling out the products. And yeah, so I'm quite happy of this gap.
I think from my perspective, I've always seen technology as a facilitator of solving business problems. Like, you know, if there is a business problem, only then technology exists, like, you know, to solve that more efficiently and more effectively. Now, in my experience, all the innovations, they do come from startups, but then ultimately those startups get acquired by big corporates, as everybody's saying here. And the reason being is that once the innovation happens, then it's been leveraged now to solve a real business use case, and that usually happen in corporates. So as you were saying, like RBS is working on a project called Jasper, and that's like using blockchain to reduce their settlement time from T+2 to like T+1, and effectively like immediately, if like one day. Now, these are the business problems that need solving, and blockchain is a technology that probably can facilitate that problem solving.
So yeah, with a panel of 5 people, the last one is always the one who has to come up with something else. So I think all of you guys already mentioned very good points. I'm trying to see like you asked for the driving forces behind kind of like the developments, etc. here, Philip. So I'm trying to look at this from a different perspective, which is history and culture and values maybe. So I'm myself from Eastern Germany, and Eastern Germany had to go through not only 1 but 2 disastrous dictatorships last century. So I think if you speak about the values of freedom, of data privacy, of self-sovereignty, of trust, which are all values that are relevant for the blockchain ecosystem, Germans just have like a lot of shared values with that. And so if I look at the ecosystem here, for example, in Berlin, it's actually not startups or corporates driving this. Like the history of crypto in Berlin started with basically the first couple of people spending their bitcoins in like the room 77 on the very first beer transaction in this world. It started with like the Ethereum development team having the very first DEFCON 0 in Kreuzberg. And that was the time when basically money was not kind of like in the system yet, when it was only driven by missionaries and not mercenaries. And I think that's rather one of the strong driving forces we have in Germany.
And that's a really interesting point. Thanks for that. One thing which is quite typical for Germany, I have to say, I consciously looked only at the 2 extremes, at startups on the one and huge corporations on the other side. However, the German corporate ecosystem, so to say, is quite, perhaps not dominated, but quite characterized by the small and medium-sized enterprises. The German Mittelstand, der deutsche Mittelstand, is not is a well-known, let's say, brand in Germany. And I ask myself oftentimes, does this Mittelstand play a role within the blockchain innovation and adoption? Perhaps to shake things a little bit up, I start now with Katharina, so that we not only drive from left to right.
From my perspective, quite a bit difficult to answer. What I see right now is, again, I have to refer to what I'm doing with my students. Very often I invite the industry to come and to use the resource what my students can do, and when they can do the research and they can find out what is which process is valuable for using blockchain. And what I see is that the small and medium-sized enterprises, they do not dare to take that chance. They like to flirt with that idea, but they no, we don't do it. And therefore, what we see is that there are governmental issues which are interested in let's find a solution, or more the big ones, and the broad big problems we see, like supply chain questions or financial issues, which is important. But I would like to yeah, invite small and mid-sized companies to say, okay, here we have a problem, and could you be so kind and analyze this with your students? So if here are any yeah, leaders, please be so kind and ask me.
Oh, I totally agree. The Mittelstand is extremely reluctant at the current phase of the market. I think this comes from, you know, there's a little bit of stability in their value system. There's a little bit of German Angst mixed into this as well, of course. So the general reluctance to adopt new technologies. We are not the first country to adopt new technologies. We are the ones who use them as soon as they are solid and reliable. That's sometimes what we like to do. And of course, you know, there is also there are some misconceptions, like Mittelstand companies might not want themselves to be associated with the waste of energy in Bitcoin mining. You know, there are misconceptions. Yeah. It's just, they basically just say, look, we can't associate ourselves with Ethereum in any way because the Bild Zeitung might quote us on this and might point out that we are destroying the planet or something like this. So there are a lot of really interesting misconceptions. And exactly, so the Mittelstand is currently very, very reluctant, and it shouldn't be. So I'm totally with you.
I think it's very difficult to find an answer that makes sense for obviously for this very heterogeneous and big market. And as the Mittelstand, they are business, so they shouldn't look and ask the question, do I need blockchain or not, but rather focus, do I have a business model which makes sense for the next, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and then ask myself, how do I need possibly to adapt the current one, and this blockchain one technology tool which can actually help me shift my existing infrastructure to stay relevant in the upcoming years. So I think it's not a question blockchain or not, but rather it needs to be part of their business strategy where a lot of other parts of digitalization need to be integrated, where this doesn't stop at updating SAP or having a new web page and a Facebook account.
It's quite strange. I always thought that London economy is more conservative economy in general in comparison to like German ones. And from all the experience that we have had in our business, all our German customers, as long as the solution that we are proposing is reliable, is stable, and is like, you know, fitting to their budgetary constraints, they would just want to go for it. Like, you know, in comparison to like if I'm having a similar size customer in London, it will take me at least 10 meetings for them to even give their like one nod to that suggestion, versus like with Germans, it's pretty much like US economy. So people just give their go ahead and they want to get the solution implemented, and has nothing to do with blockchain per se, as long as it makes sense. And that's what my experience has been.
May I interject? Because that's also what I see, and I agree with this, but I think it would help the small and medium enterprises if they are a little bit more adventurous to look into possibilities of decentralization, because I think a lot of these companies are focused very much on a central model. So as soon as you give them a solution, they will look at the value proposition of the solution, as you said. But I think there's so much more which is still hidden in these siloed companies, centralized thinking companies, which could be opened, which could be very interesting globally.
I agree. So the risk appetite of a small to medium-sized enterprises is generally low, because they have to stick to their budget, whatever they have set forward for that specific solution. But if I compare, like, you know, a German SME with a UK SME, I feel that a UK SME is more risk averse than, like, you know, German SME. That's what I have, like, you know, experienced.
It might be that the funding situation in Germany, which is highly focused for SMEs on innovation, might be there some motivation, so to say. At least that was my experience. Another thing, you, Ingo, already said that the SMEs sit in their silos. Perhaps one problem might be that there are not within a network such thing as a consortium. Consortia are quite well known within the blockchain ecosystem. Think about R3 or the ones founded by SAP. But as far as I know, the SMEs are not really involved in them. What exactly is the role for a layman? Perhaps we start again here, then you can answer it first. I personally have sometimes the impression that these consortiums are, let's say it provocatively, a corporational echo chamber where all applaud that they make huge goals, and whether they are realized or not in the end is a question. But what is the role of consortia within the blockchain ecosystem?
So I think you're hinting at basically the private blockchains that all make use of consortium to basically, yeah, you could say bootstrap the network, or just like relying on a couple of like trusted third parties to like run the network on their servers. So I tried to think very, very hard actually, and didn't come up with a solution or a use case where I think the private blockchain makes sense, but I might be the only one on this panel who thinks this way. Maybe let's phrase it this way. I think we've seen a lot of people looking at the financial space in terms of like payment networks, settlement networks, and using the blockchain technology there to make things more kind of like trustlessly or like decentralized. And other people have looked at supply chain tracking and provenance. And I think that in both of these cases, you don't necessarily need to use a blockchain. Using a blockchain comes with a lot of inefficiencies and trade-offs that if I can avoid it, I would always opt for a non-blockchain solution. I would always go for a shared database, which is timestamp, which is append only. So a lot of people can write on it, can look at that, can view that. You know exactly when which thing happened in which order, and you don't actually need a distributed system for that. And you still kind of like have a way for many people in a consortium to collaborate. That's at least how I see that. And I think the interesting part about blockchains is if you see a blockchain not as a state machine, but as an incentive machine. So you basically run a certain native currency within a network to basically incentivize people to provision their services to the network, and that's only possible if you actually have public chains.
Yeah, would you like already to answer
so everybody's looking at me, so I've just been talking a lot, but I'll just take this up now. So that's a very common question, of course, and fundamentally I think that there are two things at play. First, there is a whole marketing moniker behind blockchain. So it allows people between companies to finally get together, and if there is no consortium, to finally think about funding consortiums. And then we have, of course, a whole lot of regulation, which is, in Germany, is extremely strict, and companies tend to take this extremely serious, even small companies. And they project the worst case forward. And so based on this reluctance, I currently think that this drives the current interest in private blockchains, because a consortium can say, well, you know, we don't want to put anything in public as long as we don't know how this is going to turn out. So let's try it with the private chain. Fundamentally, I think that in the long run, in a time frame of 5 to 7, maybe 10 years, all of the existing private chains will somehow converge towards public chains. I think it's a transitional technology which gives you an easy start. However, you said that they should use a shared append-only database, and at the end of the day, that's exactly what the private blockchains are. So you install Fabric, and what you get is a shared append-only database. So that's exactly what they are doing.
And I think the problems that all these financial banks are trying to solve via blockchain, I think mostly they all are around settlement time, right? So they're trying to replace settlement houses with the technology that's powered by blockchain, you know? And the hope is that one day that time from T+2 will come down to T+1, and then probably will become a real-time transaction. So I think that's where consortium is powerful, and that's where probably blockchain is going to play a very useful role.
Maybe to add to this part, because I really like what you just said, I think all of us already use a decentralized network with like a very, very strong financial consortium, and it's called Visa. Visa was basically developed in the 60s, and it was developed by the Bank of America, which tried to like release this payment network out there for people to use it. But then they wanted to have the collaboration from other banks coming in, and none of them wanted to actually use the technology that's owned by the Bank of America.
Exactly.
So they built a consortium with that, and then basically they spin out one of the biggest networks of like service delivery and value delivery that all of us use today. So I totally agree. I think that's a good use case, and that's why I said before, supply chain and financial services probably the areas where consortiums will probably be responsible.
I would like to add something, because I think we are talking about consortia, but how many of the industries are really willing to go for this? Because if you look at the small and mid-sized companies, they are fearing what will happen if I join that kind of platform, if I share my information, if I share my data. This is my competitor. How can I share data with my competitor? What will happen then? And therefore, it sounds from our perspective, and using, for instance, the blockchain knowledge, and say, yeah, it's okay, you can trust this, it will work out fine. But to really convince the people in the market, this is another step we have to take. And therefore, again, I think from my perspective, education must be done to really bring this forward to the CEO level of small and mid-sized company to say, try it, look at this, create somehow your own small little sandbox, and get in touch with that technology, get in touch with that kind of thinking, get in touch with that kind of environment. And if you have that kind of feeling that this could help, then you can apply for specific processes in your company and using blockchain technology. But it is for all of us very easy to understand, but we have to really go into the industry. And the industry, sorry, but I'm not so sure that the German small and mid-sized companies are so open-minded for technology or the new digitalization things we can offer. I think we have a lot of problems in the market. They are overwhelmed with the term digitalization. What does that mean? What does it mean for me and my processes? We are facing the way of baby boomer, which are going into retirement. What do I need to do to overcome these problems? How can new business models help me to stay in the market, and so on? And this is much more than just only say, come on, let's go into a consortia and use the benefits out of this.
I think consortiums are a great way to not miss out on the technology. So it's, I think, the easiest way always for a larger institution to just join them instead of doing nothing or develop something proprietary. And I think we saw that there was a lot of change of participants in these large consortiums. So it's definitely not the most efficient way to create a working product, because you need to basically agree with all your competitors on common technology, on some standards. So let's see, it might be more efficient, and it's a really interesting example in regards to Visa that, for example, JP Morgan actually is selling, or I don't know if they actually sold it or planning to sell it, the technology they invented to make it less divided off their core business and make it more attractive to other banks to use it.
Thanks for the answers. I have two questions for, let's say, our silent seventh panelist, which is the audience. The first one is by show of hands. Who of you think that the DAX companies within Germany will incorporate the blockchain solutions up until 2020? So let's see. Okay, I almost thought it would be quite pessimistic. Yeah, it's a quite diverse opinion. And do you think that more regulation would be advantageous for that process? Again, by show of hands. Okay, so people are quite optimistic and think that regulation would help, so to say. What do the panelists think about regulation? Is it an inhibitor or an accelerator for blockchain innovation and adoption?
I think it's incredibly powerful and important to have regulators in the market. Regulations is there to protect consumers and investors, and I think they're there to also set standards and best practices. And the interesting thing is that actually a lot of people in this ecosystem, they want to comply, they want to adapt to the best practice, but they just don't know how. And that's basically because some of the regulators out there, depending on the state, they're just a little bit more slowly moving, and they are not really putting out their public opinion on that. I think in Germany with the BaFin, we are quite lucky because we're like in a neutral stand. Of course, there are other countries in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Gibraltar, Malta, which already try to be a little bit like the crypto Delaware. So like using regulation as a like offensive mechanism to like really position themselves as an attractive place to be in. And then there are other places like China, which is like way, way worse. So where basically it's not allowed to do any like trading or ICOs, etc. in the space. So with Germany, we're in neutral grounds, and the BaFin, I think, is doing an amazing job. And I hope that they will continue doing that job and, yeah, regulate more and better.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think when you are early in the life cycle, you want less regulations, whereas when you mature, then you want regulation, because only that introduces trust in whatever you are developing. That's my opinion.
I think non-existing regulation is basically the worst, because you don't know how you need to comply or don't need to comply. So this was actually the reason why we set up our structure in Switzerland, because it was so explicit. So if it's very explicit, you don't have a lot of doubt of how to structure your products. And I think it's interesting to see that regulators or countries are actually behaving a bit like corporations. The smaller, nimble ones who still want to like capture market share, attract business, are providing a good, transparent product, while the bigger ones who are not really forced to do so are rather waiting on the sidelines. Germany somewhere in the middle, looking at what is Liechtenstein, Switzerland doing, then taking parts of this. And there's a lot of discussion among regulators, and I think this has really been channeled through blockchain technology, that actually the BaFin is flying to Malta. I think they probably never did this before, and actually engaging with foreign regulators and looking at different ways of how to draft this regulation.
One thing makes me wonder. We are in blockchain community, and we are talking about regulation. I'm wondering. We are asking for regulation, and we want to start a revolution without overcoming that intermediary. I'm just wondering.
So I think we are.
Sorry, I just. Why is this a problem? I mean, it really depends on what you're building. But if your products, for example, financial products, just because they don't run through centralized market infrastructure, they can be still the same products as traditional financial instruments. And just because they're blockchain-based doesn't mean that they shouldn't be regulated. So I think there shouldn't be an exemption for the technology. It should be just very explicit how under which regulation they fall. I mean, regulation is not really a problem; it just needs to be explicit, and then I think it's much easier to build businesses.
I'd also like to add.
we know the grounds now. Okay.
I'd also like to add to Paul's point. I agree. I think the regulation can be a good thing. I think we have the underlying assumption that regulation needs to come from a third party, from the sovereign state, or from someone who opposes the regulations on us. And we are not considering the possibility that there's also self-regulation. And we're not considering the possibility that there are ways where we can comply without giving up things like privacy, for example. There's technology out there like ZK Starks, where you could actually validate that you have done your KYC and AML without actually disclosing who you are and who you're transacting with. So with these kind of like new developments out there, I think there's ways where you can comply with regulations, which can be done by self-regulation or maybe in the transition period, as you said before, by a state. But I think that it's there to set standards, and these standards are important.
So I'm going to do the interesting thing now. I, as the technical person, I'm going to talk about the regulation from a totally non-blockchain, non-technical point of view. Because I think we're talking about two different types of regulation here. We're talking about regulation in terms of funding of companies on one hand, and then we're talking about regulation of the transaction of value on the other hand. And I think there are some questions which we need to answer as a society. And over time, we have come to the to the conclusion that it might be best if we regulate transactions so that we don't want to fund terrorists, we don't want to fund sanctionized states, etc. So that's one thing which we need to talk about, because today banks are very sensitive about this, and there are some banks who say that we cannot touch any transaction with Ethereum, for example, because if we send a transaction on the Ethereum network, the miner could be in Iran, in Syria, in some sanctioned country, and we would actually transfer value, we would pay for this into a sanctioned country. So, and we don't know what's going to happen. If there would be regulation, it would be easier for the banks. The regulation could be clear. It could say clearly that, yes, you are allowed to do this, or no, you're not allowed to do this. But right now, we don't know. So some say, well, our interpretation is that we can do this. Others say our interpretation is that we can't do this. So we have this type of regulation. And then we have funding. And I don't know if we look at the massive wave of ICOs, which happened in the non-regulated time frame. And I think that's not a good thing. And history, financial history over time, when you look back the last 100 years only, has always oscillated between highly regulated phases and unregulated phases in terms of what an untrained retail investor is allowed to do. And we also need to find the balance here, because I think it's not, because retail investors who are untrained, you know, do they need protection or not? That's what we need to answer. And regulation will find a way to incorporate this into a set of laws at the end of the day.
But I would like to say, let's start to do something and not to go after regulation and ask, first we need to have the regulation, then we can do something. I would like to say, let's do something, and then we can see what kind of regulation might fit and how we can discuss this among each other. So I totally agree with you that you say, we don't want to, for instance, somehow finance terrorism or something like this. Completely on your side, but I think we have the chance, we have the power to create something new, to create something which is overcoming the old-fashioned systems which are still there. And for us, why do we ask or require so much regulation? Why don't we try to use this? We have more or less a kind of a playground. And let's use this as a playground, especially as the blockchain solution which are in the market. You know, what kind of transaction can we do per second? Really, you know, going for the technical part, this is more or less not that we are very powerful. So we can use that environment and we can start to play around, we can start to think about, we can create prototypes. And with this prototype, if they are really running, we then can figure out what kind of existing regulation do we touch, in which way, and what does that mean. So I would like to suggest, test it. Be open-minded enough and test things, and then we can see what is the fitting about.
But you know, if you're a small company or a founder, you need...
Since the time is rather advanced, I would at least try to ask whether there are questions within the audience, because I think we can discuss this this evening all night. But if somebody has a question, for instance back there, can I borrow one mic then? Yeah, that's also quite good.
Interestingly enough, I think that this is the easier part in terms of regulation. We might not like what we have to do, but I think it's unfortunately it's clearer than in the funding environment. Because if I want to be GDPR compliant, currently there are a number of things which are very clear that I can't do. I cannot put your name and your phone number on a public blockchain. Depending on my lawyer's interpretation, I might not even be able to do this in encrypted form, because most of the encryption algorithms we use today will not be quantum secure as soon as we reach the stage of quantum processing. And we can already prove that the algorithms are not safe, so that's the interesting thing. And so I think the GDPR regulation is clearer. It more or less says that you cannot share data into an immutable store. We might not like this, and we might need to change blockchains or to change technology to allow us to modify subsets of the data to prune subsets of the data.
And then I think from my perspective, the regularization or any regulation that comes out has nothing to do with the technology itself.
Yeah.
So GDPR doesn't really care that you use blockchain in your system or you just use a relational database. It just tells you these are the 5 things that you have to do to make sure that the data that you take from your customer is secure and your customer is aware about what data you are storing, where you're storing, how you're going to use it, when you're going to share it, if you're going to share it, and when can I ask you to delete it. Now, it is up to the implementation to decide what technology you want to use to, like, follow that regulation that's out there for storing personal information. And to your point, I think innovation has nothing to do with regulation. Like, innovation can happen in its own silo. Regulation brings more order and more, in my opinion, more discipline to how systems are made and deployed and delivered and used. So I think use of blockchain, should it be regulated? No. But if you are implementing a business use case, should there be a regulation? Yes. And that's how I would put it.
Yeah?
Isn't that the whole point, that my data does not get stored on a central server of a bank? I understand that I will know that it's stored on an XYZ bank server, but that's the whole point of blockchain, that I can safer when it's not in control of one entity and then it's spread on the network. So does it mean that the European blockchain environment will get blocked from progress compared to American one, for example?
No, I mean, I think the concept of sovereign data ownership is basically that you as a user only store the data for yourself, and then the thing that's stored in a blockchain is basically a pointer that points to where the data can be found, and that is basically GDPR compliant. So
Yes.
as long as you don't store anything in IPSS and Swarm and all of these things, then you're fine.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, we are now almost at the end of our time, and so perhaps as a small question, the one question which is oftentimes asked in hiring interviews: where do you see the blockchain ecosystem in 5 years? So to say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And it's also a little bit connected to this whole regulation problem, so to say. Would you say it's decentralized and token-based, or within private, permissioned environments, so to say? So yeah, let's start with you.
I'll say we won't have more than 2 private blockchain use cases by then in deployment.
We already have more than 2 today.
And actual usage? And actual usage?
So the problem about the private ones is that you don't get the actual usage data because they are private. There is a study, and I need to find out this source, because I've quoted this study now 3 times throughout the conference, and I can't remember the source, because and I need to ask the consortium in which I heard about this one, and that's part, or maybe I know, maybe you know it. It's no, you don't. It's at the Hyperledger Summit last month. They quoted a study which tracks private blockchain projects, and they said they are currently tracking 95 production projects based on Fabric and 10 based on Corda. But I don't know the source, so I don't like to usually quote this, because but it's just an interesting point. So, and I will find out what the source is so that I can quote this and totally answer the fact that there are already more than 2, because I can't right now. Yeah.
And maybe another point to add, which is a little bit less controversial. If we think 5 years ahead, a lot of the problems that we're currently facing with interoperability, scalability, privacy, maybe identity, all of these problems will probably be kind of addressed in one way or another, and we'll be able to push the entire ecosystem forward. And maybe by then, at least that's what I hope, we'll see a lot of actual use cases with high transaction outputs, not just transaction, but economic outputs and throughput. So yeah, it actually makes sense for the world to see there's actually something happening here.
Thanks.
So, a year ago, I was really cursing myself, saying, why did I sell those 3 Ether that I had? I should have kept it in my wallet. Now, I'm really cursing myself. Why did I not sell every Ether that I had a year ago? So it's very difficult to answer what's going to happen 5 years down the line. I think what will definitely happen is we will see if this technology really has some basis, and if it will really solve some real business problems that we all are anticipating blockchain will solve.
I think it's one of the fastest changing industries in regards to technology, but also regulation, what we touched upon. And I know when we started, we needed to build a lot of building blocks for our products ourselves. Now we see better products which we can basically exchange through individual modules we have built, and we're like gradually changing from this really groundwork where everybody's trying to build just really the first layer on which actually products and applications can live. And I think we'll see in these 5 years really products and use cases which won't be used because they are blockchain based, but because they are just better products to centralized solutions now.
I completely agree with that. And what I think we will see a shift in how to use, or the discussion will be different because of what's going on with blockchain. Blockchain is a technology, and as we know, or the majority of the user, they are using their emails and so on without knowing how the HTML protocol is working. And the same is what we will see in that blockchain community. We will create better running business solution, and we will use this. And as long as the front-end solution is nice and fine and convenient for the user, then we will use this. And the technology and hopefully the better solution based on probably blockchain is there. I keep my fingers crossed, but I have a strong belief that we will see blockchain remains in the market. It will not be banned, it will stay.
I think that there is one key turning point which we are about to see, and it might happen within the 5 years, or it might happen a bit later. And the key turning point, or the key question is, how much does the end user realize that she or he is dealing with a blockchain solution? Which means that, do you log in using username, password, as in every system you're using today, or do you have a private key for something? Because if we have a private key, that's the only point then that the user can actually take part in the benefits of a decentralized system. And that's when you control your own data, as you said. And the problem is, if we want to make this a reality, we have to get some kind of decentralized key recovery system or idea going, because otherwise my parents will call me up and say, Ingo, how can I log into Bitcoin to change my password, please? I forgot my password, help me. Call them to recover my key.
I think that's a nice last word, and since we are now at the end of our time here, I would like to thank the panelists and you for the nice questions, of course, and I wish a nice evening.
Hunderte von Fragen vorbereitet. Thank you very much as well from my side, and